We work with about 50 business owners here in Las Vegas and 20 up in Reno. And basically what we do is we bring business owners together and we put them on peer advisory boards where we meet once a month and purposefully time to work on our business. Because as business owners, we know we get so busy working in our business. You know, you're fixing this, and you got 10 emails, another text comes in, and phone calls. So it's hard to really strategize about your business. And so when we come to these meetings, that's really what we're working on. We intentionally work on a strategy, and then we use the collective wisdom of the group because we know what we know, but it's what we don't know. That's the key. And so when we bring it out into the group, all of a sudden now we can get collective wisdom, and I can learn from somebody else's mistakes, not only my own. And also just what we've learned is this: a lot of times a challenge in one industry has actually been solved in another industry. They just don't cross-pollinate. So that's one of the things that we do with the alternative board. But we are super excited. So I know we had a board this morning, and they were fortunate enough to have Howard come in and join them. But we have Howard Lim, and he, really is this. He was born to brand. And so with no further ado, we're going to get Howard up here, and we appreciate you coming in from LA, and we're excited. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. There's a lot of content I want to go over because there's a lot of mystery. What is the truth behind branding? So I'm going to just jump right into it. And I love getting to know people. It's great starting to get to know several of you. So let's jump right into it. Is like, what is my purpose being here? Okay, so my purpose is really to deliver world-class applicable content and think about renewing your business as a renewed brand during this crisis, right? But to also elevate your purpose and wealth, and I could say opportunities as well, okay? So I love this quote by Albert, which is, imagination is more important than knowledge. And the reason why I say that, because during any crisis, it is a time to rethink and use your imagination because there's a shift in tide, okay? So a little bit about my past is that I was a disruptive and still am a disruptive solution provider. And during the time of when I was starting to realize the digital revolution, I wanted to help lead it. And so just real quick to just build some credibility of who I am, so you just don't think you're talking to some muscles up here, right? Talking to you. So how many of here have actually seen the Broadway show Lion King? Okay. So we were the ones that actually introduced that to Disney's investors. Vice President of Disney called us and said, we need to position this to get our investors involved of what is Lion King, the Broadway show, which we did, of course, successful. And its ad revenue, that number's way off. It's $8.6, I think, billion. How many here have seen HBO and seen the graphics? Okay. That was before motion graphics was a category called motion graphics, which we introduced as well for actually ABC, NBC, Fox, and HBO. How many here has used a DVD to watch movies, DVDs, okay, in the past, right? And it's streaming now. But the big thing is they took over VHS and Beta. We branded that whole category as a new category for MGM and Philips, okay? The list goes on. I don't want to bore you, but the point being is that disruption is really where you change the course of history. And you change the pattern of how we actually communicate and actually change society as well, okay? So we were known as the disruptor of helping to lead a digital revolution for the Fortune 500 companies. For the first 10 years of my business, all I did is represent Fortune 500s. That's where I started to understand the truth behind branding. There's so much talk about branding, but no one really even knows what branding is. Even people I meet that say they do branding, they're not doing branding. They're doing graphic design, they're doing PR, they're doing marketing. They're doing a segment, but they're not doing a totality of what it is to build a brand. And that's why I'm here, okay? Let's see here. So what we produce is literally, I should say trillions of dollars if you add it up, but multi-millions of dollars revenue, brand value, and equity. What I want to focus on, the revenue is a byproduct. It's the value and equity is that I'm interested in. This is what moves the needle in the stock market. Okay, so 34 years I've been in business. 10 years is only representing Fortune 500s, 100s, really. 24 years ago, I had a revelation that I wanted to solve this problem. Why do 95% of companies fail, become stagnant in 2 to 10 years? Okay, my recommitment to business owners, all size business owners, was really to invert this number into successful businesses. Why? Because when we have a stimulated economy that's working, everybody freaking wins. So that's what my vision was, is to have a strong economy. Okay, so everybody wins, and we lift up the standards of everything. So our proprietary system is a whole brain approach. I got it from my dad, which is I'm a whole brain thinker, so as much as I think analytically, I think creatively and vice versa, but become that bridge. So what we're looking at is how do we increase exponentially, not 10%, 15%, even 20%, but how do you exponentially grow a company and its wealth and its opportunity? It's really designing a world-class business and brand. So we create a whole new category where we literally design businesses which we actually register with the government. Okay? My focus here is talking about one of those segments, which is branding. And I have to start off with some of the basic principles behind branding, which is misunderstood. A brand is not your logo, product, or service, or your business. Okay? So your brand is not a logo, product, service, or your business. What the hell is it? Okay? So I have to break out some of the terminology, right? So brand is really about what you convert and suggest to a consumer of how they think about your service or product or information. It's what's called the brand image, which resides in the heart and the consumer's mind. That's what branding's ultimate game is how can you infuse or brand that image in the mind and the heart of your customer. It's like taking, broad iron, right, and branding it, right? So I always say, well, how big is your real estate in the mind and heart of your customer? Okay? And is it measurable, by the way? It's the expectation matched to the experience. It's the expectation matched to the experience. Okay? So let's just say that you had a chance to win $1 million on a racetrack driving a new 2021 tractor or a brand new Ferrari on a asphalt straight line. What would you choose? The Ferrari or tractor? It's not a trick question. Okay. How many here have driven neither or both of these 2021 versions? Okay. Okay, you have. Oh, who is that? Okay. The point being, you've driven both. You've driven both. That'll be the first time in history. That'll be the first time in history I had someone that driven both. But here's the cool thing. You already know what the car stands for, which one's faster without having a driven one. You already have an expectation. All they have to do is deliver on experience. You understand that? That is the goal behind building a brand in the mind of the consumer, is an expectation that's matched to the experience. Okay? So the business doesn't run the company, the brand experience does. If the business ran the company, it would be a commodity. Okay? There's only two ways to build a brand. Oh, I don't allow filming. So there's branding from the hip or branding by design. Here's the big thing. Over 95% of companies are branding from the hip. And let me explain this further. Why it's not a good thing to brand from the hip. It leads to commodity, failure, reaching the ceiling, missed opportunities, and poor perception. What we do most of the time is we're repositioning companies because they reach a ceiling. I don't care if you're making $2 billion. You're going to reach a ceiling, you can't grow any further because you don't have the right DNA, which I'll be explaining during our session here.
Howard?
Yes.
Can I ask a question in the middle of your speech?
Sure.
So we know shooting from the hip. We understand what that means, but you defined it for us. Like, what does hip mean here? Like, if you say HIP, is it hiring business, a small business to rebrand? What is your
It's
from the HIP?
from the hip means that you're not doing it by formula or strategically doing it. You're doing things where here, and I'll get into that, where people are actually they have an idea to create a widget and they go right into the marketplace but forget the biggest asset, which is their brand. So they're not really thinking how to build that equity and value as they're actually bringing it out. And it took Coca-Cola and all these big companies, Fortune 500s, decades to figure out and then explain how that's done. So doing it from the hip is not having a clear strategy. Okay, and strategy always comes first. Why do I say that when I say by the hip too, which is a great question. A lot of people, they hire graphic designers, advertising, marketing people, but there's no strategy how to align all the ingredients together to actually play music. Okay? It's all done without thinking in the long term to build value and equity. Okay? So that's what I mean by the hip, is without planning, without having a blueprint. Okay? So here's the problem. So branding from the hip is doing it yourself. You're trying to do it yourself, or you're hiring the wrong people, okay, for the wrong position, for the wrong role. So what happens is, say, you end up going down a 30-yard line, and you come out with your name, but you haven't done the strategy to figure out if it's the right name, or actually you could trademark it and build some equity around the name. So then you're penalized, right? So now you're actually back down to, let's say, the 15-yard line. And then let's say now you move from the 15-yard line, you get it right, and then you start building a message, but it's not even a message that's related to your business to distinguish you from all the rest of the pack. So now you're set back another time, right? The point is you never reach your end zone. Okay, this is what I see on and on and on and on again with companies, is that they're hiring the wrong people, or they're trying to do it on themselves, okay, by themselves. So it becomes a waste of time and a waste of capital. My friend Barry Spilchuk told me this, and it's quite honestly genius what he said. If it's not your genius, it's not your job. You need to find the right team members. It's their genius. Whether it's marketing, operations, system development, advertising, marketing, whatever it is, you got to have the right people in place to fulfill on your vision. Your job as a business owner is to have a vision and to move it forward with the right team, meaning that you have everybody going down the same field in the same direction, right? Okay? So here's another issue that I see, is that there's silos. Okay, so let's say that this is your offline marketing, your social media. Let's say this is your website, then you got some TV, you got an app. Everyone's working in their own lane. There's nothing being uniform collaboratively towards a specific vision. This is what I see constantly. So then you end up with a mishmash, right? Everyone's working in silos. And now you're about putting out fires with your business rather than moving it and advancing it forward. It's not efficient or effective working this way. But most companies are designed this way, by the hip. Here's another reason why companies are designed by the hip. Yes, sir?
You threw a category in there that I've actually never seen when it comes to like marketing and branding, which I thought that was fascinating, is your legal team.
Right.
Everything else kind of falls in what most people, and myself included, think of. Could you elaborate a little bit more? Like, why is the legal team so important to this combination of
Okay, you're nailing on something that what we do different than most branding firms. God, you're really smart. So what we look. This, you're the first person that ever pointed that out and noticed it. I was like, wow, you get kudos. I forgot to bring my book. I would have given you a signed autograph book. But
you email it to me, bro.
I paid him $1,000. So you're right. So what I look at when I design businesses is looking at the business to the brand to the market working together. Mm-hmm. The business side is a legal side, and the reason why that's so important is because the intellectual property is to increase the value and equity of your company when you sell it, or you want to build franchises or license it. Okay? So it's so important for me that things are protected when it comes to building your brand. Because let's say you came up with a name, and this happens quite often, quite honestly, with a lot of my clients, and that name is actually being used by another company. But that company came out with that name first, and they could prove it. guess what? You lose all that equity and value you built over the years from the name change. You have to reintroduce who you are to your audience. This has happened many, many, many times. Or let's say a patent. Or let's say your structure, the way you design your company, it should have been an LLC versus C Corp or S Corp. Then you have issues around that because it limits the growth. All the ways you communicate to your consumer, all these different shapes, nothing matches. So let's say your salespeople, the product itself, the packaging, the product design, let's say the information that you're actually distributing through social media and so forth, let's say your sales team, let's say PR, nothing matches. This is how most companies are set up. Nothing matches to tell one cohesive story because they haven't even figured out their own story. Okay? So, unfortunately, there's lack of congruency, interrelationship, and you're burning cash at an accelerated rate. So you're trying to figure out why all these companies or startups are their burn rate is so significant to a point where they actually never get really launched. They're doing things in the wrong sequence. Okay? And then what I mean by poor perception, 10 being best, is at best they're looked at as a 2. And I'll get more into that. Or where companies have a glass ceiling where they can't grow any further. Okay? And there's a lot around that which I'll be talking about as well. So I say the difference between how you present yourself and how you position yourself is where the money is. How you position yourself, okay? And basically how you differentiate from you and your competitors. So the model, it just doesn't look very simple, but it took me 10 years to figure this out, working with literally over 100,000 companies and speaking to 100,000 companies and figuring out their problems. The first step is figuring out your core position. The position in your business model matched to your brand that now can be communicated through marketing. Most companies have an idea to go right to the market and forget the biggest asset because they misunderstood and misunderstand what branding's about, which is the biggest asset a company can own. And I'll get more into that. So the first part is figuring out your position, and then it's about wrapping an identity that matches that core position. Here's the cool thing. You own these two things, but most companies are doing it wrong, therefore have very little influence on the consumer, which is to build that image in their mindset, what you stand for, what makes you unique, and why the hell should they care about you versus everyone else. You see that? Most people are just saying the same crap that everyone else is saying, and they're not distinguishing themselves based on what's called a value proposition, and also known as a brand promise. So let me just give you some tangible assets around here. So here's like Hertz, right? Okay, they've been number one for years, back in the 70s and 80s and so forth. It was around the 80s where then Avis came into play and said, oh my God, Hertz is like a big giant company, you know, that 10-ton gorilla. How we're going to actually compete? What they did was super brilliant. They looked at what was differentiating them that Hertz was not doing. Hertz wasn't focused on customer service. That's why they came up with the tagline, we try harder. You know what that did? It moved in the number one position the following year. Okay, and so taglines a lot of time is about the overall position and a promise of a company. Another example would be like, let's say FedEx. Absolutely positive guaranteed overnight. Who is the competition? The post office, which sucks. Document. Especially if it's an important document to get signed for $1 million deal or more. How much I remember going freaking down to the airport, LAX, if I needed something urgent to get to my client, I'd literally go to LAX and put it in the cargo to get delivered overnight. Okay? That was my system, right, to get it delivered overnight. It was very cumbersome.
That's commitment.
That was commitment. And they figured out if they built a system, they could say absolutely positively guaranteed overnight. How cool is that? Changed and disrupted the whole industry. and had UPS and everybody else follow their tracks, right? So, what the consumer owns is the image that you are projecting. The question becomes, are you projecting the right image that you want them to leave an impression about, right, in their minds and their hearts? Okay? If it's done right, here's the cool thing. You're now revealed, you're not concealed, meaning that you're actually talking about your potential, your value. Less cost and time to acquire customers, attract higher paying customers and better employees, much greater potential. Here's the thing too, besides either branding from the hip or branding by design, unfortunately most companies design by the hip, there's only two ways you could build a brand. Price or value. And guess what? There's only one that could be based on price by sheer volume. Exactly, Walmart. With very thin margin, massive amount of volume. Everybody else has to be based on value. But nobody really looks at a value proposition because they don't understand it. They're hiring the wrong people, graphic designers, branding people, but they're not getting what really will sink home to the consumer to understand what they're offering is better than anybody else and you should be the only choice. Not easy to get to, but that's the secret, okay? That's part of what I call the DNA. Yes, sir?
You said something that I absolutely love, but can you just make sure I heard it right? What is it the consumer owns? The consumer owns...
So the consumer owns the image of what is really truly what's called a brand. A brand is really what's branded in the heart and in your mind, like you're branding a cattle, right? It's showing ownership. You have two ways to influence to do it right. What is your position and how you're going to communicate that through your identity? Most companies do not have this right. Okay, if you'd be surprised, the big giant companies I work with, they're scattered all over the map. They've been pushing a big boulder uphill and they've been very lucky. Okay, they're not going to be scalable.
So
going global.
Perception, is that really what you're getting at?
Exactly. Now here's that you're right, but there's two parts of it. Perception meets experience. The consumer perceives it like the Ferrari, right, in a tractor, but they also have to experience that the Ferrari is a faster car. So now it's embedded in them that they made the right choice. You see that? That doesn't matter if you're B2B, B2C, B2G, or a combination. It doesn't matter if you have information product or service. It's the same difference. As long as you want a customer, you got to brand yourself right, or you lose it over to your competitors. That's just the way it works. Okay? So this is the way I look at it. It's first positioning, then building identity, and then marketing. Most companies have it at a sequence. They don't even have the positioning right, quite honestly, but they go right into the marketing and they forget the biggest asset they could ever own. This is what moves the stock market. And that's what moves future earnings, by the way. Okay? And I'll get a little bit more into that, how this works as a business. So, when is branding by design needed? Now. I don't care where you're at in your business cycle. You could be a startup, you could be in growth, you could be going franchising, you could be selling your company right now. And if you built it right, even if you're selling your company, it'd be worth a hell of a lot more. Okay? Because you're also looking at the investor, looking at future earnings, and then looking at actually what is actually the ownership of the property. Okay? Because I work with a lot of different types of investors. Anyways, the point being is that and today, because of what situation that we're in, you can't compete in today's economy with a brand from yesterday. Here's the reason why. Because I remember when I was a little kid, in the 70s, you go down the cereal aisle, and basically you had Kellogg's. They dominated the freaking aisles, right?
Right.
Now look at today. All the different, just cereals alone. We're not even talking about sodas, and we're not even talking about, the speed drinks. But anyways, the point, you just flooded. You're flooded with information. You're flooded with products. The question is, how are you going to stand above the heap? Okay, that's the bigger question to ask. And I'll teach you how to do that. Here's the big thing about what I learned working for Disney, Apple, Xerox, It wasn't working for them, it was representing them. They hired our team to get them more global, to build more equity. This is what I learned. This is really important for any size company. Assets linked to your brand identity to add value to your service product, and I should say information, because we also have categories of information, okay? So let me put this in layman's term. If it wasn't for Coca-Cola for identifiable bottle, the shape of the bottle, if it wasn't because they owned the color red in the cola space, if it wasn't for their trade secret, and if it wasn't for all the advertising and marketing focused on one theme, open happiness, they would be worth $60 billion. But because of all these associations built as assets, tangible and intangible, the equity, okay, is worth $120 billion. You see that? It's done in a way where, so there's a difference between brand, we create a new category called brand designing. Graphic design is like a lot of times where you're putting out a fire because you need a brochure, you need a website, you need a trade show booth, but there's no system involved to build the equity. So it's like here today, gone tomorrow, and you got to reinvent yourself every freaking year, right? You're losing equity. You are a liability at that point that will be very difficult to sell your company that's any worth much as far as its future potential, okay, or its projection. If you design things that actually, where you design something to fit in a system, then you're designing something that actually has a lot more value and equity in the long run. And I'll get into that more deeply. Okay, and I could say that because I was in design school for 8 years at the best school in the world, and they don't even teach you this shit. It happened from working with Fortune 500 companies, representing them to understand what is branding, right? So, like I said, the logo is not the brand. It's 5% to building a brand. Here's the cool thing though. If it's done right, the most valuable asset you could ever own is a name and a mark. I'll show you the difference between a logo and a mark. So for example, let's just say you, right? You go, Howard, I'll sell you Nike, I'll give you all the distribution, I'll give you all the retail space, I'll give you everything, the manufacturing. But you go, you know what, Howard, I'm not going to sell you the name or the swoosh. What's the company worth now?
Not a damn thing, that's smart.
Exactly, it just turned into a commodity. But it can't be any type of mark. It has to be, or logo, it has to be a brand mark. So here's the secret, okay? Even the big companies have flopped around this, and I've watched them flop. So look at Apple over the years. How is this representing the value of Apple on a 10 scale, right? 10 being best. Not very much, right? And there's a lot of reasons other than just the way it visually looks, but it's not actually practical to work on all the different medias. It looked like mud. It looks like mud up there already, right? Then it got really expensive to do Pantone colors. Their packaging actually cost more than the product back in the 80s. I remember that.
No way.
Yep. Because it's every pass, you had to go through a press for every pass. You know how expensive that became? Then they got tricky and said, oh, let's get really tricky with the current trends, right? They finally got smart and kept it simple, okay? Now that's actually transferable in any media. And there's other things that we look at, like is it simple, is it unique? Yes, sir?
Do you think they would have had as much success with the current logo if they started back in 1976 with that logo?
They would have had more success with the
More
success. Because they wouldn't have had to redo and spent millions, if not billions of dollars redoing all their packaging. You know? What they did have, though, is the ownership. I think Paul Rand designed, a famous designer, designed the shape of it, right? Microsoft didn't figure this out until recently. This is what's called a word mark. How is that supposed to translate when you're going global to Chinese or Arabic or whatever, right? What they figured out, what they need, which is called a pictorial mark, this becomes universal in language. Does that make sense? You don't even need to say Microsoft to understand it's Microsoft, and someone was smart enough to figure out Hey, you know what? We use the Windows. This is our symbol of the Windows system. Okay? They finally figure it out. Okay? But think about it. They had to redo everything over and over again for all their franchises and everything, right? Okay? So the same thing happened with Starbucks, by the way. This is called an emblem mark. Not practical when you want people to be associated with what's called a pictorial mark. So you don't even need to have the words to understand at Starbucks. Does that make sense?
Can you say it one more time? What mark between 1992 and current?
So this is called an emblem mark, where the words are combined with the pictorial mark, with the visual.
Yeah.
This is where they got smart and they want to separate the two because it gave them more flexibility in situations where now you just need to see that symbol on the far right, you know it's Starbucks, without having to say Starbucks.
Wow.
You see that?
Is that called a pictorial?
This is called a pictorial mark,
Okay.
a picture mark.
Yeah.
Okay? There's all these classifications of marks.
They
It's-
have gotten away with that if they hadn't established them as that.
Yeah, because they would have used Starbucks had they do it on the side or underneath, but kept it separate. But think about it. They had to redo all their signage for every freaking franchise. All their packaging had to get redone. That's pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Mistake, right?
So one's a registered mark and one's a trademark, why the difference?
Well, that's a great question because when they had this registered through the government and then they needed to resubmit this as a new mark. Okay, but they had to show usage of it in public domain. Yes, sir.
So did McDonald's have the golden arches from day one?
No, well, yes and no. They've been through evolution, but the more or less the answer is yes.
So they were
They stuck with it. Yeah, they had it figured out from the beginning. Okay, so a logo, so we created 18 categories of what makes, or 18 attributes that makes a logo versus a mark. And the reason why I did this, because I went to the best school, like I said, and I got a fucking B+. Because the teacher that I had, I'm live.
Now you are the man!
The teacher argued with me and said a logo could only last 10 years at most. I said, what happens if you know the science behind what makes up all the geometry of the universe, that you come up with a solution that actually is the fundamental for everything of the makeup? Because it's not possible. So I took it upon myself for freaking 10 years to figure out what is that formula. So let me explain this to you. This is a company that places assisted living nurses in assisted living conditions for homes. Very expensive, RN nurses, okay? So we're not talking about caretakers or caregivers. We're talking about actually RNs placed in a home. So what we did, I'm just going to show you the tip of the iceberg, is that we create a strong mark that really represented them. So we create a new category called brand mark, where we put the science and the business behind the mark. Why do we use a rose? And I'll explain that. We go into a strategy session to figure out the position of the company, what's making them unique. They place a rose at the foot of the bed every time they make the patient's bed in the morning. That's how first class they are. So we said, why don't we utilize that and put that in the mark? The other thing too is that we then gave them a tagline, the elderly care specialist. And then when they had it, where home care is created as one word, and I asked them, why did you do that? They didn't even have a reason for it. So we created it where it had a look and a feel that was elevated like Tiffany's rather than looking like Walmart. Does that make sense? Because now we're creating a unity and alignment between what are they projecting and how do they want to be known, and a connection between how to represent yourself to the experience. Okay? Yes, sir.
Can you explain again what you teach from it? I don't understand. You said a logo can or should only last 10 years?
Well, that's what my teacher told me.
Why would you think that though? Because look at McDonald's, for example. I mean, that logo is wrong.
It's gone through evolutions, though. It has gone through
So
evolutions.
you can keep the logo, but you have to...
Yeah, evolve it, exactly. And I said, no, we could create it where we break it down to the basic fundamental shapes, triangles, circles, and squares, where actually it becomes timeless. So my objective at that point was to create a system that would create timeless marks. Why was that important? Because now the company doesn't have to change and re-educate the consumer of who they are. because you lose customers when you have to reach. Now, there's times you need to do it because you're losing more potential than you are losing customers. And there's a way to get around that as well. Anyways, WSS, it's a big footwear company. They're actually here now in Las Vegas. This is the mark that we created for them. Flying Dutchman, they couldn't grow for 40 years. In 3.5 years, we built them 5 franchises. Okay, and the list goes on. But I'm just showing you the science behind building a strong brand mark. A brand mark should be unique, simple, and bold. It should represent the company. It should have symbolic meaning behind it, and should last for a very long time, more than 10 years. Okay?
What would make a brand mark not last 10 years?
I don't know. Every mark we've created since I started, UCSB and they're still there. If you're using the fundamental, here's the fundamentals what I mean. The universe is made up of triangles, circles, and squares. Freaking, that's why Apple's so genius. Steve Jobs, all his design is based on the fundamentals. The iPhone is based on a fundamental shape. You can't get much simpler than this. It's, right? The shape. Right? He came from taking the Japanese philosophy, by the way. Here's the cool thing with Apple. All their design of all their product has a similar look and feel to identify Apple. And everybody else is a copycat. They're still trying to figure out how Apple did it, because Apple had figured out the formula. It's left brain and right brain taking a holistic approach to things, and that's why the Ferraris and Lamborghinis and Aston Martins are so freaking gorgeous and timeless, because they figured out the formula. Does that make sense, you guys?
Yes.
It has a timeless feel to it. They broke it down to the fundamentals. Okay, so I'm saying any company can do this. So the reason for this, again, because you want to build your equity over time and your value. And the way you do it is you design it right the first time as being world class. You'll get where you want to go faster. You're taking the straightest line. Okay? So I'm going to show you some case studies now. So here's a brand new startup, and I can't divulge who the company is, but it is the biggest company in Japan, beverage company, and they wanted to break into the market, the U.S. market, with the beverage. Okay? So I'm going to talk about position and value proposition. And there's a big difference between the two. Okay, so I'm going to run through it as examples. So they want to get in the soy milk space. Here's your soy milks that are on the shelf right now, right? They all look boring and all the same. I mean, they had crappy designers. But you know what? They're making it pretty good, right? But at some point, if a company's smarter than them, guess what? They're going to disappear. It's just the way it works. Okay, so when I go out in the field and I look at what's out in the market, and then I look for holes. There's always holes in everything. So anyway, so with them, what we did is we went through a very intense strategy session. Usually they're 3 days long, but they usually, what it does is collapse what would take two to 3 decades to figure out. We do it in 3 days. What is the DNA behind the business to brand? So then you're branding and marketing. You're marketing the brand, but you're building a brand based on a business model. Does that make sense? So anyways, we triangulate, right? And we figure out what is the best strategy, find a blueprint, what I call a master blueprint. So we figured out they want to do soy milk drinks, but I said that's boring because everyone says soy milk. What's hip right now and what people are after is plant power. We came up with that. Now freaking companies are copying us. But if you take a look at what's relevant, you want to always push the envelope, but you want to be also where you're connecting with the consumer of what they feel is more valuable. And they're going, oh, I'm just getting soy milk, but what happens if we say it's plant power, right? Now here's the cool thing. The reason why I call it protein drink, because when I went through their process of their intellectual property or their patents, right? And I'm not going to divulge it because I'm under NDA, but they could extract from the soybean more protein than anybody else. And they have scientific proof to prove it. I said, that's what we're going to position everything around. We're going to position what you do uniquely than any other company, which is extract entire soybean to get the most protein out of it. And we're going to position the drink around that. Now here's the cool thing. We knew it was woman, the category is woman who we're after as our target market, but then what are we after? Here's a woman on a go, okay, so we said the right choice for the active lifestyle, Here's a woman on the go running through the airport with her child. That's one segment, okay, of the woman population of a woman on the go. And then we explored, what happened if we did this? We changed the cart and we made it, dressed it up so it's more contemporary, more attractive to the buyer, right? Then we said, why don't we do this? Why don't we look at it from another angle and look at the woman that wants to keep sexy and healthy and change the actual container to an actual bottle. And talk about what they're looking for, okay? Low fat, no GMO, contains probiotics, organic ingredients. Let's talk to them what they're looking for. Remember, a brand is what they want, right? And how you communicate to the consumer, it's not so much about what you have, it's more about what's their best interest. And that's where a lot of companies fall short too. They're not looking for the best interest of the consumer, okay? So another one is like, why don't we change the formula of the design and have it where you could see how much you drink, right? So this is going to be semi-transparent. And then let's keep it super minimum design, because we could start the trend of minimum design, because I feel like everything's over designed. And so how you stand out on a shelf is by looking at how everything else, remember those cartons, all those cartons all look the same? This would totally stand out. Here's the cool thing. If we could deliver on experience based on the expectation, they'll come back for more. All we have to do is let the consumer buy this once, and if it delivers on the flavor and delivers what it's supposed to do, we know we have a long-term buyer. Now, with their formula of the taste of the soybean drink, it sucked. So I told them, I'm not going to put on, we can't deliver on a promise because we haven't created a brand promise yet through the formula. So they're back to the scientists are back formulating, right, to get the flavor right.
So it's not on the market yet because it doesn't taste good yet?
Nope, doesn't come to what I want as a standard to actually deliver on a promise based upon the expectation of what that looks like and how we build billboards. Otherwise, it'll fall flat on their face because it doesn't deliver
You
on
were
what they're...
upset when you told them it sucks?
No, they're open-minded. I said it a nicer way. They're literally ready to build a plant in the U.S. Seriously. I saved them, I don't even know how many millions of dollars to build a plant. I said, no, we're not ready yet. Okay, here's the reason why. And they had a brilliant marketing person, and we worked really well together, and my job was to build a brand that he could market. It wasn't marketable yet. Okay?
So Howard, quick question on that, because that's a timing issue, right? So you've done all of this marketing up to the point where you don't actually have a product yet,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So how many companies, and I'm in the biosciences, so it's always technology first. So when is the right time to start all of this stuff? Because
Before you even bring anything out to market.
really,
Absolutely. Most people waste a lot of money bringing things out to the market without understanding the psychographics and the demographics of the individual who's going to be the buyer of that product as an extension to their lifestyle. And psychographics matter more than anything in this world. In fact, let me do this. I forgot to do this. If you don't mind, you guys, if you could fill in your information on a sheet. I forgot to hand this out and pass it around. That would, like, I'll email you guys, and if you don't want to talk to me, just ignore the email. But if you want a 20-minute conversation, a half-hour conversation, how I could support you or what I could look at, I'll be more than happy to do that. Okay. So I'm not selling, I'm basically saying I love helping out entrepreneurs. So back to your question then, that's where a lot of companies fall flat on their face. They go through these major productions and they don't even test the product or see the actual scope of actually understanding the buyer. And they wasted all these hundreds of dollars they raised from investors.
but it's got to work though, right?
Well, that's what you do. I don't believe in focus groups, but I believe in beta testing. I believe in first beta, second beta, where you might try it in one grocery store just to see how it works and how it sells and who's grabbing it. Take that data and expand across the board with it. Okay? So you do it where you could actually control it in a very reasonable way without going full board and just falling flat on your face and spending all that millions of dollars. Okay, so you're right. Most companies don't do it right. So then, this is when we went really radical, And we said, why don't we design something super sexy, something that's very functional, and someone that's really active on the go. Okay? So you can see each design is different based on a segment of that woman on the go. And most people just clump people together without understanding really who that buyer is. Okay? Okay, so then I'm going to get into, now that's just the start. With a company that's existing, so I know there's different types of entrepreneurs here, product, service, information, B2B, B2C, B2G. So I'm trying to do my best to cover and blanket, okay, because we do all that, but I only have so much time to show case studies. So here's a bigger case study. Myler B. Butler, okay, was the first Bohemian governor general, okay, in the Bahamas. That's like being the president of the United States, okay? She started in 1928. Selling door-to-door and began with a retail grocery store. Okay, so I flew to Bahamas, and the first thing I do is I look at a strategy. What is our strategy? What is our blueprint? What is it that you're having challenges with, and how can I help you solve these problems that you're bleeding resources and money? Okay? So then his grandfather was so popular and such a leader that he's permanently on a $20 bill, okay? And then with that being said, he was actually ordained by Queen Elizabeth II to help the independence of Bahamas. That's how much power and influence this guy had. Here's the problem though. During the Greatest Generation, he was extremely well known, but over the generations, he never had a brand that actually was working for him to build the equity and value. You see that? Okay? So it might last you through a generation, but what happens after then, right? So we go through these 3-day intensive, and my objective, based on an assignment that I give my clients and looking at what problem we want to solve, saving generations in costs and redos. We're talking literally generations of money, of constantly redoing things. Alignment between all the different departments of all the sub-brands that they carry, and re-establish them as a brand leader in the Bahamas. Okay, so that's not an easy task, but that was a challenge, right? I love challenges. So the first was to figure out their business strategy, what they weren't doing correctly. The second is, once we figured that out, is what kind of brand do we want to wrap around at to elevate to the consumer of what they stood for and who they are. The third component, once we figure out the brand, is now be able to market and what I call and what we do is customer strategy, which is deeper than a market strategy. They're both important, by the way, but I find customer strategy is the first in line before marketing strategy, okay? Here's the kicker. This is the property. This is just a small portfolio of what they own. He was actually flying me from island to island to island. He goes, oh, we own these banks. We own these shopping malls, by the way. We da-da-da-da. The list went on and on. This is great to bring in investors from the top as a holding company. But what happened was that it wasn't enough to build a brand, to build it over a certain amount of time to be scalable and sustainable. So they were bringing in money in from the top, okay? But they had Myler B. Butler and Sons Distribution, Butler's Home Essentials. They're all different names, and Flying Dutchman was a whole separate category in itself, right? So the first thing I did is I look at the architecture of their business, and I said, you need to simplify the name. Because I said, with Myler B. Butler and Sons Limited, how many sales have you done on the website? That's a mouthful. And they said 0. I said, that's the reason why. So we shortened the name, and thank God one of their brothers, because it's family owned, is an IT guy, and they own Myler Butler. I said, why don't we capitalize on Myler Butler now, because that's what people are calling you, by the way, anyways. Because we did a survey. I don't believe in focus groups, but I believe in customer feedback. And what we're finding that everyone was calling him Myler Butler. That's why Federal Express changed to FedEx, by the way, you guys. There's a reason for this stuff, okay? So Myler Butler's distributors, this became extensions then. Now I actually could build a brand on the business model by reorganizing the business model of the architecture of the business model to build a brand, okay? So now we could actually then use that to market. So here's the cool thing. In this situation, Butler's Home of Central had the perfect opportunity to market Butler's Bargain Mart, right? We changed the formula where Myler Butler Home of Central, where the mainstay was Myler Butler. Do you see that? And the extension is Home of Central's, and the extension is Myler Butler Mart. Now we have the opportunity to cross-fertilize and cross-sell between the two brands. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now here's the other part to this. So once we figured out the structure, then it was about how to communicate it visually. So Myler Butler, okay, this is the main brand mark, right? What we did is that we end up looking at how we're going to create it where there's a relationship between the brands, okay, which we want to create what's called a branded house. But you see there's a certain look and feel. It's a name change and a color change. This made it identifiable in the mind of the consumer that this belonged to one company. Now it became a lot more powerful. So here's the kicker, you guys. Yes, sir.
Did you say brand in-house?
Oh, okay. So yeah. So there's two ways to build a business that matches the brand and brand match the business model. It's a house of brand or a branded house. So a house of brands would be in the case like General Motors. You have General Motors, you got Pontiac, you got Chrysler, you got GM in itself, because they're doing acquisitions.
Yeah.
Each of those took a certain amount of resources and capital to build each of those brands. Very expensive way of doing it. Versus if you take in the same case of the industry of automobiles, you have BMW. BMW, what they did was really smart. 100 series, 200 series, 300 series, 400 series. Guess what? All the consumer had to remember was BMW. You see that? And by the way, they create what's called a trade dress with all their vehicle. The kidney beans, okay, in the front.
Yes.
All their cars have that signature look, as in Ferrari, as in Lamborghini, as they have a certain look and feel.
Bentley, yeah.
The American cars are starting to figure that out. And they're starting, like Mustangs for a while are gorgeous, right? 60s, and they turn like crap, 70s and 80s, 90s. And then now they figured out what was authentic to them. And he brought that back, and he did a beautiful job. And the Charger is super freaking cool now. It feels like a muscle car, what they're known for. They lost touch when they brought in certain CEOs that didn't understand branding, quite honestly.
So is that called brand? So brand in-house?
Oh no, there's a house of brands,
House of brands?
and then there's a branded house.
Branded house.
House of brands where you have many brands that are disassociated, and there's times to use that.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then you got a branded house where everything's focused on one brand, which is also called a monolithic brand, which is BMW.
House of brands, BMW is a branded house.
Exactly. Exactly. Now there's cases where you would want to, know the rules and knowing where to break them as well, which I could show you as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Now why is that important? Because it helps with your business model to get a lot of traction when it comes to building your brand, and then your brand being able to be marketed appropriately with the right channels to that right person. So if I was like buying let's say a 300 series, and I love the 300 series, the idea is aspiration into a higher model as a 500 and 700 model, right? So then I would get a piece of literature saying, hey, you know what? We know you love the 300 model. Why don't you step into our 500 and 700? How brilliant is that? Okay? So it's strategy first, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So there's several components that what makes a brand really successful, and one of them is vision. So with Myler Butler transforms everyday business into movements that create positive differences in society, enriching the areas, okay, of business, education, medicine, government, individual families, and the general public. Why was that important? Because his grandfather was doing that, and what got lost over the generation, there was nothing stitched in stone to say who they were as a vision. Does that make sense? Every country needs a vision. Ours, of course, is Declaration of Independence. And when people screw with it, unfortunately, things happen not in the right direction. If you look at Soviet, you look at China, there's a reason why things happen the way they do. Okay? But when you stick to it, the philosophy and vision, you can keep moving forward. Okay? Anyway, so the vision is super critical to a company, as it is to a country. And the philosophy, the vision is what legacy do you want to leave behind? You're thinking so far in the future, it has nothing to do with money. It has to do with what legacy you're leaving behind, literally. A philosophy is why you're in business. These are really the ways that you're going to navigate and steer the waters when it comes to challenges. So with their philosophy, Myler Butler adds value to the society through building a legacy of ethics, mentoring, and empowering people. We sustain our bohemian heritage and reputation with courageous leadership, because it took a lot of courage for his grandfather to do what he did. Mutual respect, which is really important, and personal accountability. He didn't want any freeloaders. He wanted to empower people. He wanted to enable people, not disable them by giving out handouts. Does that make sense? So critical to his philosophy. Here's the cool thing. When we introduced the philosophy, the vision, and the values to the actual employees, people deselected themselves out that were not part of that because they couldn't fit in. You have to have like-minded, hearted people in your company. Otherwise, you will pull in all kinds of directions. So what we did is we gave that to HR to hire the right people. Okay? You got to start off with the right people in your company and then figure out what role they should play. Okay? So this is what they used to look like. Okay? They wanted to be world class. Did they look world class there? Okay? They want to do more business across the globe. Would they look serious compared to like, Campbell's, okay? They're actually vertically integrated from the standpoint of manufacture, distribution, and retail. So that's part of their distribution center, okay, right? And then of course the vehicles. So what we ended up doing after we figured out, and here's the bigger problem, the bigger boys were moving the block, taking a lot of market share. They were getting, over the years, we're starting to erode, okay? And nobody cared who they were, okay? So these are the big companies that were moving in and small companies. These are the bigger boys that were moving in, taking a lot of market share. So what I do is I do a lot of research. I went to Bahamas and became a secret shopper. What are they doing that we're not doing? And what can we do better? It's always what can you do better? Okay? So these are the big boys, and there's a lot of holes. There's always plenty of holes and plenty of opportunities. So this was the old logo, okay? Remember, it not reproducible, it looks amateur, doesn't look professional, doesn't translate all across all media, it's not inspirational, okay? So what we end up doing is I have 500 designers, they're all award-winning, and so we get it where we design different marks to reflect what came out of the Stride session. So we're introducing the science and business into the mark, therefore becoming where it can last forever. But keeping the fundamentals, it has to be simple, bold, and unique, which actually adds to trademarkability as far as being trademarkable, besides differentiating from your competitors. Now, the reason why we designed it is because the M and the B is built into this. He was ordained by Queen Elizabeth II, which purple is a royalty color, and then green is complementary, which has to be very green and lush in the Bahamas. Everything is super intentional. Nothing is done by, oh, that looks pretty. No, it has to have concept and substance behind it. Does that make sense? It's not designed for design's sake. That's the before and after. And then this is called a brand style guide, okay, where people create style guides of the do's and don'ts of what fonts to use. But this goes deeper. It's a manual to the values and the philosophy, the attributes of personality. This is important to get everybody on the same page as far as employees. So when Steve works on a culture, now it's actually as a Bible, so people understand who you are, what you stand for on the inside, so then they can reflect on the outside to the actual consumer, okay? So this is called a brand style guide, which is all the do's and don'ts. This actually puts things where now you could have it where, what we call the primary colors, the complementary colors, the accent colors. There's actually another page with neutral colors, okay? The point is you want to look uniform. This is how Apple does it. This is how Disney does it. They create a system that actually works no matter what media you're working with, so then you could take up a lot more market share because you're identifiable to the consumer, which is called instant recall. You're not instant recall if they can't figure out who you are. It's instant recall when they start recognizing who you are. Is this making sense? Okay? So this is what the do's and don'ts, what fonts to use in situations. So when I was with them, I said, what are we doing to create the biggest profit in your company? Again, they were distributing like General Mills, all DuMonte, all the big players, but they had their own brand. And I said, Franklin, let's do the math on this. How much more profit can you make on your own product versus selling out someone else's brand? And of course, it's a much higher profit. I said, this looks like it's from the 70s, right? And there's no no continuity. We had a couple drinks and we could talk straight, right? Yeah. So anyway, so we looked at their packaging or their private label, but it had the biggest margin, but they couldn't sell many of their private label products. So what we end up doing is that we end up redesigning their packaging to increase the value of their product. Who we're up against? DuMonte, all the big players. But you know what? All those companies look boring. When I go on a shelf, I said, your buyers, your future buyers, they need to be stimulated aesthetically, and they look the same as they did in the 70s. They haven't been relevant, they haven't been able to pivot fast enough because there's too much bureaucracy to make changes. How do I know this? Because I worked with a lot of these companies. You're dealing with more red tape than you are getting shit done. So anyways.
How do you get around bureaucracy when that seems to be the barrier itself?
I was really straight. I didn't care if I got fired. You know, they're hiring me to be honest. And so, you know, I'm talking to Vice President of Disney or ABC, and they're like, who are you? I say, well, fire me if you don't like what I'm saying, but then call up my references and tell me what you think. Say they call up, you know, HBO or whatever, and they go, oh shit, okay, you're hired. But I'm going to charge you twice as much now because you're difficult to work with. It's true. So anyway, because now my quality, and I figured out for myself, one of my values, you got to have fun. I don't care if you have $1 billion. If you're not going to have fun, I don't want your money.
Yes.
Okay. So anyways, here's the opportunity to create a trade dress. Campbell was smart enough to create a trade dress. Every time you go on go to shopping, you know, aisle, you could spot Campbell's because they're red and white signature, right? You could actually trademark a trade dress, like the dummy books, right? Remember when we stores? They would dominate the shelf, right? So anyway, so we want to create a certain look and feel, and we changed Super B to make it more modern, right? But we created, so here's the reason why. I'm all about building equity and value in a company. I'm about, if you go to an exit strategy, how much can you sell your company for? When he hired me, Franklin hired me, goes, I want to do a tenfold and then I'm going to sell it. I said, cool, I like that game. Anyways, we did it in 4.5 years. They couldn't grow for fucking three generations. They couldn't grow for 3 generations. We got them where we wanted to go, right? In just a few years. Okay? So anyways, this is one trade dress, and then this is another trade dress. Okay? And then this is another trade dress looking at the Campbell situation, right? But just to introduce it in a different way, being more clean, right? Here's a kicker.
One of those 3 that you use?
This one. Okay? We use this one, and here's the kicker. I said the flavor has to be as good as the reflection of the brand of what you're perceiving to the consumer being better or equal to one of these other bigger brands, and it was. What we're able to do is raise the price because we could fulfill on the experience. We're creating an expectation. It's going to be good tasting. We had to deliver on the experience. So I become, you know, you could talk about beta testing. I'm working with a company, which is a really cool company, but it's an alcohol company. So I said, you have to send all the alcohol to me. I have to test it to see if the flavors are actually better than your competitors. So that was.
The mackerel?
I'm sorry.
Did you eat the mackerel?
I tried all of it. Yeah. Yeah, they're big. Mackerel is big over there. Anyway, so this is what the old website looked like, and then this is a new website. We design everything custom, so everything has to tell a story. Why would you want to invest in Myler Butler? So we had to tell a story, which is called a back-end story, which is a heritage brand. You could base a brand based on heritage, preferences, geographic location. There's many ways you could build a brand, but it's understanding the different ways you could build a brand to figure out what is going to be your anchor. Does that make sense? So branding's a whole nother language, right? It's a lot to know, but the point is, when you master the language, you get to master your brand and get to drive it where you want to drive it. So this is the old area, the actual distribution center, and this is a new one. So, I love all parts of every aspect of branding, from the architecture, interior designing, billboards, radio spots, bumpers, What I'm most interested in is unification of it all, so that all looks the same. Architects, interior designers they hire were brilliant. Did they understand branding? No. So I had to be a brand manager. There's 3 roles to play: strategist, implementer, and manager. So I had to make sure that what they were designing was exactly what came out of the strategy session, the blueprint, to make sure what we're doing was in alignment with it and in uniform as one identity. One story, one look and feel. Does that make sense? Because if you leave it to creative people, they'll do what they want to do, right? But they won't look at it from the standpoint of what is your target. They're doing it based on their personality. They're not looking at the target. Yes, sir?
So if I'm a customer, how often do I see the manufacturing facility? Why is that associated with the brand?
That's brilliant. Okay. So what they do is they distribute it through the Bahamas is all these big companies. The first place they arrive to as what's called a touch point, which we call aspiration engagement point, is they actually the headquarters, the distribution center. That's their first touch point for the customer to experience the brand. A touch point in a branding world is anything to communicate your brand to the consumer or prospect. That could be someone on the phone. That could be your website. That could be a vehicle wrap. That could be your marketing, digital, offline. That could be your advertising. That could be your PR. What most of it is actually, it's all over the map, generally speaking. There's not one unified voice and look and feel to it. So when you have, and I call them that touch points aren't enough. So in my book, I write about what are called aspiration engagement point. You have to be inspired, okay, and you have to be engaged. Why? Because the idea is, when it comes to market formulas, is that you have to get known, you have to be liked, and then they have to trust you. Most people don't understand that, and they try to sell something before even getting known. Forget about being liked. Forget about being trusted. They basically are pushing versus pulling. Push marketing versus pull marketing. But if you have a brand that could speak for itself, you're going to pull people in because people want it. Just like Apple, iPhones are not cheap. What are they, like $1,000 now for an iPhone, right? They're not cheap, but people are still buying them because of the value. You get that?
Yeah.
Okay? So this is the first engagement point. When they fly someone over from Germany or Switzerland, the first thing they're going to see is a distribution center. And the upper part is not going to be very attractive. Their subconscious is going to go, this place sucks. Right? They're not going to say, this place is world class. They're going to pay attention to us, and I could trust them. This place is like, these guys are based on price. They're not going to give me anything of value. There's a lot of psychology. You see it?
It builds the perception.
Exactly. It builds a perception. So with every engagement point, it should build the best perception based on the potential of the company, not where it's at now. I'm a futurist, so I design from people's future, so they're at that now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we design it to where they're at now, it still look like the top part, right? So I'm about quantum physics. How do you collapse time?
Yeah.
Is through perception. But you have to deliver on a promise. You can't fool people. You have to deliver on a promise.
You fold it.
Oh, you fold it. Yeah, exactly. You fold it. you fold space, right? So now it's not, doesn't become linear. And then now they're getting photos because they're really building that. It's a 3D model, but they actually is being built right now. Now, this is the original Myler Butler mark, and then this is the new one. So what's important about this, it's not about just him and Myler Butler. It's based on his grandfather. He wanted to brand Bahamas. What my job is to rebrand Bahamas to build it like a third world country into a first class country. Does that make sense? So it's much more than Myler Butler. It's a bigger picture they had. Remember from the vision philosophy? We're creating a whole new standard on the islands, literally, okay? So we're enabling people to be inspired rather than bringing down the standards, okay? Now this is what was a ripoff. I ripped this off from the Apple stores. How do you get people to participate? You build an experience. So instead of, this is the way I look at it. The cycle of how they sold was they have someone that fly in, let's say from Germany, Australia, Japan, or whatever, and then they would fly into all their distribution retail space. I said, why don't you have it where you actually have, like the Apple store, you have a location that's built into the distribution center, and then you show them what their product would look like, eye level, shoe level, waist level, and you sold them based on the shelf space. Totally shortened the time frame of a selling cycle, and it totally worked, okay? Because what I look at is what are the problems that companies are facing with their brand, but also from the standpoint of the cycle of the business from the consumer's perspective. Anyway, so that was what it looks like, okay? This is the old vehicle wrap, and this is a new vehicle wrap. And when you own your own media, especially a vehicle wrap, think of it as 24/7 advertising. It's the best advertising you could have, okay? This is the old reception area, okay, the second touch point besides looking at the outside of the building. When you come in, I said, no, we need to make it more grand. We want to feel like that person's getting taken care of. So then we built this, okay? So I work with the interior designers to make sure that they're working from our strategy of the position of our strategy, so everything aligned, okay? So they regained brand awareness as an industry leader, hired like-minded people and hearted people, increased sales, equity, and value, boosted morale, pride from the inside out and from the outside in. What I mean by that is that they hired the right people that believed in the brand, that then they became ambassadors to the brand and spokespeople to the brand that made it easier for them to sell. Does that make sense? Okay? So we were able to do it. You know, he called me. He's now working on a big freaking bank index, because he told it to his brother. We got the 10X. Okay, so this is 6th division. What time is it? Am I running okay with time?
Oh, you're great. You're
Okay.
great on time.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there's 6 divisions. So I'm trying to get, I know there's a lot of different types of entrepreneurs in here, whether you're B2C, you know, or B2B, or, you know, or if you have a product or service information. This is more information. This is a technology company, okay? So we work with every industry, every category. So I'm trying to get it where you can imagine yourself with your company. That's why I'm showing these examples. So at 6th division, he was a 6th employee of Infusionsoft. So his brother was a starter of Infusionsoft, which is a huge company, as you could probably know, right? For marketing. They were the #1 training, or were one of the training companies, but they really want to become #1, put it that way. But they were unclear with their message, lack a system, a process, and growth, an unrecognized brand identity, lack a company culture, lack a strong value proposition, and lack a brand personality. So let me back up what a brand personality is. I know there's a lot of ingredients to branding, but when you watch a commercial, let's take insurance companies. Have you noticed there's a difference between Allstate with the Mahan guy versus Flo for Progressive, or the little gecko lizard for Geico?
Yeah.
Those are all called,
From State Farm?
and yeah,
Oh, yes, Matt.
there you go.
Hey.
So those are all personalities. Now, why do they create personalities? To build relationships, to build that trust.
Right?
Yeah. To build it fast.
The brain.
What's that?
Humanizing the brain.
Exactly. Thank you. Humanizing the brand. It's a way to build relationships faster as a brand. Okay. So here's the deal. When we start working with them, again, we went through a massive strategy session to figure out where they're losing revenue, Why aren't they building equity, and why aren't they where they want to be in a time frame of how long they've existed? So we had to break down all their blind spots, basically, right? And then build a structure from their future so they become that now. So it's very intense 3 days, right? And I call it the DNA. After that, we start working on the brand mark. So I need to just show you, just one company, we came up with hundreds of marks that related from the strategy that gave them a unique feel and look, okay? These are just a few of the brand marks that we came up with. But they all had a uniqueness to them, they all told a story, and they all differentiated from their competition, and they're all reproducible for every media piece, okay? So I just want to show you just like amount of work that goes into this. Why? Because we want to do it right the first time. We want to make companies global, world-class. That's my training, the first time. So a very small company could move very rapidly if they have the right look and feel to attract their target audience. Okay? That's the old logo, and then this is a new mark that had the 6th division. As you can see, it was like, it's smart mark, with the division mark, right? So what we look for is what can we do to minimize the brand mark, make it unique, and that was intelligent, that tied into the business model. Okay?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You said something that I've never heard before. Smart mark?
Yeah, where it's actually intelligently designed rather than just going, hey, my brother-in-law, why don't you design a logo for me? Right?
Well, yeah, like piggybacking off of you, like they all look slick, but they're all hexagons.
Right.
So it was
Because there was a reason for that, because of 6th division, 6-sided. Anyways, that went into the strategy to build in the model, right? To look at the model.
wow.
So there's the whole reason why we created brand marks versus logos is because there's a science and a business behind the mark to make it last forever.
Gotcha.
Okay? So we narrow it down through the strategy why we're designing what we're designing rather than it just looks pretty. We'll make it look pretty, of course. And then they had a piece of software that they engineered and they had patents around as we're in the strategy session, so we created a plus this mark.
Right.
Okay? And then, of course, the brand style guide, okay? The do's and don'ts behind a brand. And here's the cool part, okay? This is when we start introducing them to the world of who they are now, okay? So you can see there's a certain look and feel and font that we use and colors, but everything matches. And this told a story online, like really great testimonials, things done properly above the fold, and how your eye moves down with a longer page. All by design, okay? Here's the reason why. Because a lot of times people, when they see above the fold, it has to capture your attention, and I'm a firm believer in YouTube videos first because of algorithms. The second part, let's say you're not ready to buy. I want to learn more. Guess what? It's not what you're saying, it's what everyone else is saying. That's where the testimonials come in place. Does that make sense? Most people are trying to build their business from a one-way street, outward, not looking inward, of what's the best interest for that consumer. Okay? Anyways, and then we talk about the story of who all these individuals are, meet the faces. Because one of their key values is having fun, right? And they created this really cool video, have a really cool space, but they're just killing it. Of course, they're marketing geniuses, but we had to give them the formula to their brand so that now they can market accurately. Does that make sense? So again, people a lot of times, they have an idea to go to the market, but forget what kind of identity do they really want to market, and they're marketing something that's half full based on the potential of the company. But if you base things based on a strong brand identity, higher fulfillment, you're going to have better results. It's just math. Okay? And then we talked about all their stories and videos. Now they have a way to categorize things, do things very logically. Okay, so industry leader, like-minded, hearted people in their culture, radical increase in sales, equity, and brand value, systems and processes that allow for scalability. They couldn't grow, and they couldn't figure out why. Okay, it's because their brand that they had was hindering their growth because it was designed as a system. Does that make sense? So like what Steve does, he designs systems for the cultures and processes. So the way I look at it, Steve, it's like you work on the inside, and then we look on the outside to build that bridge to the consumer. It's a 1-2 punch. But you need both of them. You need both. It's like an engine and then a Ferrari, right? Beautiful on the outside, but the engine's high performance. So, so Steve builds a high performance engine, and I make sure that it runs really fast, right? And it looks good, right? So anyways, the one thing that I always start with companies, okay, is an online brand assessment, because people go, oh, how do you start? I always start with an assessment, okay? And what that is to go through an evaluation of your company through your assets, meaning your website, your logo, your brochure, your product design, your packaging, your vehicle route, whatever, your sales pages, okay? So with this company, they were not able to reach their sales, no value proposition, poor online customer experience. This is a huge company over in China, but they had problems with their new product, okay? So what I do, okay, is I work with people online, and I use Zoom, and then I start marking up everything that's wrong with their website, or let's say their logo or brochure or product design or their packaging or billboards or interior designs or whatever it might be, signage. And I'm looking at what are they missing? What do they don't see? Someone said it brilliantly, knowing what you don't know, what you don't know. Okay? Knowing what you don't know, what you don't know. Okay? Because it's a whole realm when it comes to branding that people don't understand. So anyways, what we end up doing is I end up marking up. Hey, we're your value proposition. You're saying you're innovative. I don't even know what the freaking this pan does. Okay? Right? It's like, I don't know what it does. How does this help me with my lifestyle, right? So I'm going through it really rapidly. We have an hour, and I'm going through it and ripping it apart, but in a gentle way. And then telling them what's missing. Okay? And I said, here's what's missing is your value proposition to your target markets. We have dialogue, right? And I'm saying, you know what? People don't know what this pan does. And I said, what we need to do is tell what its story is. It's a little bit too light and luminous. But I said, this is what it does. Cook a full meal in one pan. That's what the stance does. You haven't even told the story of what it does. Does that make sense? Now we pigeonhole, in a good way, of what the pan does. And you know what? For breakfast, lunch, and dinner, okay? It's for the bachelors in college that are too lazy to cook, okay? Or don't know how to cook, right? And I was definitely one of those guys, right? Still kind of am. The second thing is like looking at what they could do with that information, and then all these awards they had that they never represented above the fold. To build that credibility, because remember I said, trust is the ultimate shortcut to a buying decision. Usually it takes 7 to 15 steps. What happens if you could do it in 3 to 5? You basically hooked a customer to be a customer, right? Rather than just a bystander. Anyways, the other thing I looked at was, what can we do to actually create a family of brands? So why don't we create, from the standpoint of your business structure, is Masterwares as the parent company. And then you have the master pan, and then you have the master spatulas or whatever, right? So now there's a system to this. So I help them with the legal, I'm not an attorney, but I know enough to know what we could do to make it so the value of the companies increase by doing the right steps, okay? So we got that. We got master cookware. And this happened in Australia, in that 1 hour session. And then they came back to me and they showed me what they did, okay? So now they're telling a complete story, right? And they're talking about the pan. They've done things a lot more sophisticated. They gave it back to their designers to show what can be done, okay? So now the measurable result is clear, concise message, easy website to navigate, positive website feedback, radical increase in sales, and of course it's more sustainable and scalable as a brand, okay? That was just a quick one where I start off with, again, an online brand assessment to get a company to understand their blind spots. So now I'm here to answer any questions that you may have about your company and its brand. This is my information. If you are interested in online, just if you're interested, then let me know. It's $500. I usually charge $3,000 for this. And then, so right now, now it's you guys. What is it that you're doing that you have a question about your brand or marketing or advertising that you feel you could ask me? Unless you know everything now. Yes, sir.
I have another question regarding cost, because the Bahamas company example is like you were so involved. You were involved in the building, everything. I mean, that must cost a fortune, right? Because you're spending a lot of time and effort.
Actually, no. The way I do it is, I was talking to Steve last night when we were having dinner. I'm where I want to be. So me, it's about helping out companies. So I have 5 different packages based on the size of the company and based on the ethical guidelines that's put out by AIGA, that I've been part of that membership since the 80s. And it lists the ethical guidelines and pricing. We're priced as our fees is a B-, but of course we do A+ work. So we're extremely competitive. The way I work is that with companies that are startups and under 1 million is one price point. 1 million and 10, 10 and 25, 25 and 50, and 50 million and above. And you're right. What I love to do is I like to get involved with all aspects of the brand. So I call myself, or I call the firm, is a big firm, small boutique, where I'm hands-on because I understand design and production, and I know how to communicate to teams through their language, having worked with architects, design, study architecture, computer program, all that stuff, right? So I understand how to communicate. So my objective is to build a world-class company, and the way I know how to do it is through my hands-on experience and knowing how to steer companies out of trouble. So yes, it does take a hell of a lot more of my energy, but I want to make sure that I could deliver.
But you also have people that work under you.
Oh yeah, I got 500 design. Yeah, I got 5 different types of attorneys. So yes, I do. After the 33 years, actually 34 years this year, I built a corral of people I could trust that are award-winning or have done the work and improved themselves in the Fortune 500 world. You know, most of the people that work for me, they've worked in the Fortune 500 world, so they know what world class is. That's how I pick and choose. So I've gone through thousands and thousands of portfolios and this and that to figure out who's a great writer, who understands. By the way, every media has a different type of attention span, and every media requires sometimes a different type of writer. What you would do for a sales page is completely different for an advertising for print. What you would do for a TV spot is completely different from what you would do for packaging. So what I've done is I assembled all these different types of different writers that are experts in their field, right? And then some people are really good at multiple tasks, right? But anyways, yes, it's a whole corral that I've developed, a stable, you could say, I guess would be the better word. And we all work off the same playing ground from the 3-day strategy session of the blueprint. The blueprint tells a story, and it becomes the blueprint to build a city, okay? And then I'm basically the foreman or the contractor as well as the hands-on to make sure that everything is built around that plan to build the architecture building that we're building. So, great question.
There wasn't one that said, so mine was good. And they all looked and said, like, so the value proposition again, I was so impressed with the presentation today. I walked away and I was
Oh, thank you.
We really are. And we're trying to give 34 years of college in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
4 hours today. So really, because it was at the end that everybody got excited. Keep getting your I know. And at the end you go, you can't stop me. Right? So my endorsement, and we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot today that we're going to bring back to our own website. Because I looked at, we're not even in the right realm, right? We all go in this
Right.
We have dramatically shifted from diametric opposition. If it is, okay, we have spun around in circles, like the guy who's doing who's that guy in the morning who buys all the gold and everything, right? Yay, right? Yeah, that's what we're doing. And it really requires this type of calculated and decisive energy in our businesses to start to do this. So again, this is
Oh,
my
thank you.
testimony to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And the other thing too, this is a big opportunity. I started my company during the recession in '87, and I had an opportunity to work for a company or develop my own company. I'm so glad I developed my own company. And every time there's been a crisis or a recession, that's when I freaking literally reframe, reconstruct my business to be the next wave, like literally. And you know what? It gets me so much further because everybody else is collapsing and I want to expand. Does that make sense? Because people are going from fear rather than opportunity. Okay? And if you guys do the opposite, it's kind of like when it comes to the stock market, you're like, oh, I'm going to sell when it's going down, right? The worst time you do it. So you have to look at it from a standpoint of the actual patterns of things. And when you start to study the patterns, then that's when you could actually pull ahead, and I call it slingshotting, and changing the trajectory of your future, literally. Sir, yes, ma'am.
You know, I can imagine moving out of your career, you have really seen so much change. I mean, things are really noisy out there, right?
Right.
As a business owner, trying to, get through all of that noise and have a voice is quite a challenge. Really, I don't even know how to wrap my head around it.
Right.
As a 47-year-old woman, so much has changed in my life.
Right.
How is that changing when you think about planning?
Well, it's changing. Well, let's put it this way. It's evolving. The fundamentals are the fundamentals. What happens with a lot of companies, they're not based on the fundamentals. Does that make sense? There's principles that will never change about a business becoming profitable and a brand being known and really good marketing. Most people, what they do is they just jump on a bandwagon rather than looking strategically what has been proven over time. Like I'm talking about science, right? When you look at it from that perspective, then you have a foundation to really build from. And then what you're talking about, how can you leverage with the trends that are occurring? It's a difference between who are you becoming with the trends versus who are you going to leverage, what trends are you going to leverage to increase the value of your brand. Does that make sense, you guys? Okay, so a lot of people, what they do is they don't look at the fundamentals, and that's what's missing. You know, I mean, I started off as trained graphic design when it was back in the old school day, before it was computers. We had a California job case where you had to get these letters made out of metal and set a paragraph with perfect spacing, the perfect type. 1 month to create one paragraph, to create it perfectly. And guess the teachers I had. Greg Hutchinson, who was the creator of the Dior brand, Christian Dior brand. And then I had Robert Denchen, who created Mid-State Bank. They were freaking phenomenal, and they were brutal. You think I'm brutal? Holy shit. Those guys just told you exactly what they felt. But the cool thing is I learned so much from the fundamentals. And so what's happening now is a lot of people, they jump on a computer and they call themselves a designer without understanding the fundamentals, or they're just throwing shit up. And now you have all the shit out there, which is great for you. If you do things right with the right expert, you will show up. That's the beautiful thing. So that's how you take advantage, is you look at what are the fundamentals that will actually work through case study after case study after case study as a formula. And by the way, each company here, which we talked about during the workshop, you probably have a process that you would actually trademark as being your formula, okay, that's unique to you. Companies don't know who they are and what they stand for. And that's the first place you need to get to first, is to lay down that foundation. Who are you? What do you do? What do you stand for? What's unique about you? And why the hell should people care? Most companies don't even have that. Okay? Who are you? What do you do? What makes you unique? Okay? And the critical part, why the hell should people care? Yeah, what do you stand for? Right. What do you stand for? Okay? And when you were really clear on that, then you could build a culture around it. as Apple has done, HP, Nike, the list goes on, right? That's how they are able to grow, is that they have the fundamentals in place to build and start that foundation and then start looking at technology. Most people, they move right in technology without doing their research. I see that over and over. Oh, we have this cool widget, okay? The younger generation, I got this great widget, I got this great widget. Who the hell cares? Right? Literally, who the hell cares? Right? Get to the place where people are to take notice because you actually have a fundamental motto that you could actually create some revenue. Even nonprofits need to create revenue. I don't care who you are, you need to create revenue. So you need a business model. Yes, sir.
So how would you deal with the brand if you are in an acquisition scenario where you have two companies, they aren't like an IT or a Unilever or anything, but they have both solid brand, solid marketing, they're well known in the space, but now you're jamming together.
You got to be careful. That's where you want to talk to Steve. The worst thing you do is jam two cultures together that don't even know what they stand for, and everyone's freaking confused. I've seen that over and over and over again.
It's happening.
It's happening.
The deal's done.
Well,
It's going together.
it could be. You could lose a good chunk of your employees because they don't know what direction you're rolling in. And not only that, not everybody's rolling in the same direction unless the new CEO that's taking it over or the one that's actually doing the acquisition is very clear to describe what the vision and the values of the company. If they're not clear on that, it's going to go to shit. You'll get a lot of money from the sale, but I'm just saying from that point on, it's going to take a lot of rebuilding. So that's where, like Steve, where his genius comes in to make sure where he does is looks at where the leaks are happening that you don't detect. Does that make sense? That's a good point. That's a really brilliant point. Because a lot of times companies, when they merge, Kinko's, FedEx, remember that? So Kinko's had a great brand recognition. It's called brand recognition. How much is it realize instant recall in the mind of the consumer? FedEx, of course, is very well known. So it made perfect sense to call it FedEx Kinko's at the beginning. Then someone was smart enough, they got some smart people in there and go, we need to make it part of our family as FedEx family. So FedEx Office emerged. You see that? But so there's a time where you need to basically evolve and you need to shift. But if you do it too short of a time or too long of a fuse, you can lose the equity and value of the company. So in your case, that's a great question. You have you brought it up. If you have two companies that are merging, what the hell are you going to call it? That's why a lot of time attorneys, which is the individuals like John, Smith, Peter, Frank, right? Harry, Sue.
So that's now you need to think about do you brand the house or you do a house of two brands?
Exactly, and that's where you got to do the deep, heavy lifting and thinking to figure out what are the pros and cons. How does this actually dilute the value of the company, of the brand, or how does this actually increase which name is more recognized in the industry, or do we have to even create a new name and create a master brand?
Are the brands complement each other? There's different segments. So there's spine and then there's design. So it's all the same.
Industry
Yeah, it's all.
and a category
But yeah, different segments that are.
of that category.
I asked the question because my problem was opposite. I had everything, I had basically 5 different companies that I had all jammed up into one thing. And then Tab, Patrick, Kevin, they're like, dude, you got these 5 different things. So I spent, what, take me a year? About a year pulling them all apart. And then I created a branded house.
Mhm.
Everything is the Evolution brand. Evolution Art, Evolution Building.
Smart.
Evolution Developers.
Smart.
And it made, on so many levels, it made it so much simpler. So, not only our branding per se, but our accounting,
Branded house. Now here's the other equation to that though, with what I showed you with Myler Butler. Did you did anyone notice that Flying Dutchman was left alone? You know why? Does anyone want to take a guess? Different philosophy, brilliant. I wish I had a book to give them. I forgot to bring my limited edition books. You're brilliant, and you're exactly right, because the philosophy was completely different. It was great for that whole body, but not for the Flying Dutchman. They didn't want to be associated with the Flying Dutchman because they had a different philosophy.